Good evening and welcome to The Big Story. I'm Alyssa, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. The Land Transport Authority, or LTA, has reported a deficit to the tune of $1 billion for the 2018 and 2019 financial year. This is because public bus operations have incurred losses as fares are below the cost of government contracts awarded to transport firms, including SBS Transit and SMRT. To explain this further, we have senior transport correspondent Christopher Tan. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
So how does the bus contract model work?
Okay, what happens is that the LTA will carve up the island into parcels of routes, and then they put this up for tender. And firms, either local or foreign, will take part in these tenders. And the lowest or second or third lowest bid, based on quality and quantity, will win. And they get to operate these parcels of routes for a fixed cost over a fixed period of time, right? But they don't collect fares. So the fare revenue risks is borne by the LTA. In our case, when we moved to bus contracting 3 years ago, we didn't put up all the routes in Singapore up for competitive tender. Quite a lot of it is negotiated with the incumbents, which is SBST and SMRT. Negotiated contracts would mean that the LTA sits down with these two operators, and I suppose they would have some parameters and some guidelines which they glean from the competitive tenders and use them to negotiate negotiated contracts with these two incumbents. I suppose that could, reason for that would be that maybe they don't want to expose themselves to too big a change because we are just moving into bus contract for the first time, right? And if they open it up to a lot of competitive tenders, maybe you have a lot of unknowns. But on the flip side, you may run the risk of not having the full efficiency of competition. Because competition, the whole thing about bus contracts is that you have competition, and in theory, competition drives down price.
So now having made your points, do you think LTA should open all routes up for tender?
I think eventually in the future they aim to do that because the whole point, like I said, for these contracts is for competition, and the more competition you get, the better it is.
Now, does the $1 billion deficit mean that the bus contract model isn't working out?
It's hard to say. We can look at, first of all, we have to understand that public transport is subsidized anyway. You either subsidize it up front or you subsidize it at the back end. No public transport in the world is viable just from fares alone, right? Unless you are talking about Hong Kong's MTR, which has a property component in the equation. The rest of it, I think you need subsidies. In the case of Singapore, we are seeing a sudden surge in subsidies because we have moved into a new model, and the whole thing about this new model is that we want to up the service standards, right? The whole thing about this bus contract, and we feel that it is better for the operators not to be encumbered by things like depreciation, capex assets, and all this kind of thing. And they just focus on meeting service standards, right? And so the government takes away the revenue risks, takes away the assets from them, and they just focus on that. So if, let's say, the service standards that we want, right, are met, then I would say it's fair that, it's money well spent. Of course, the other question is $1 billion in such a short time money well spent? We don't know yet, you see. And we have to look at other cities. For instance, in London, they are spending to the tune of £700 million in bus subsidies this year. Without foreign exchange, for a dollar-to-dollar comparison, it's lower than us, right? It's lower than us. And I think a lot of other cities are also lower than us. But if we look at the measurement that the LTA uses, which is place kilometer, which is a measure of capacity provided, bus capacity in this instance, and you divide it and you bring it down and you arrive at an amount which is 4 cents per place kilometer, it seems low. It seems quite competitive, right? But the absolute amount, $1 billion, by any measure, is a lot of money, right?
So you mentioned whether or not it's money well spent. The fact remains that this is a deficit and it's $1 billion. Yes. So moving forward, what do you think LTA will do to plug this? Because if not, it's just going to increase.
In all likelihood, it will increase because it's just shot up 50% in the last 5 years, right? That's what the LTA tells us. And it's worrying because we've just moved into bus contracting in such a short time. There is a likelihood that it will just increase. Well, the good news is that Singapore, is wealthy enough to bear this kind of cost. The bad news, of course, is that the cost will have to be split between taxpayers and commuters, right? I mean, nothing is for free, right? Somebody has to bear the cost. And I think Transport Minister Koh Moon said in Parliament once that he would like to see the fare formula revised. And maybe down the road, when this formula expires, we will see a new fare formula that probably takes into account this component, right? And there is a likelihood that fares will go up. But like I said, I think if you get the service that you want, then it's good, right? And we have to keep an eye on operators to make sure that they actually meet those standards.
Okay. So you were here last week to talk about the fare review, and there will be an increase on public transport. So now you're saying that in the next 5 years we can expect increase again. Yes.
So I mean, of course, the LTA would, of course, the other thing they could do is to pare down the capacity. But of course, that would mean service standards operators will have a harder time meeting the service standards. Right now, I think the observation is that you see a lot of buses fairly empty a large part of the day. In between the morning and evening peaks, you see buses which are fairly empty. But that's the nature of public transport. You have to have enough capacity to cater to the peaks. And then in between, you will have some emptiness. I mean, that's the nature of public transport. That's the inherent inefficiency. You can't escape from that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So long story short, we will be paying more for our public transport in the future.
Yeah. In all likelihood.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for coming on to share. For more stories on transport, you can, of course, read Chris Tan's stories on the Straits Times website.